My name is Harper, am 31 years old, and am sitting in a Manhattan law office signing papers that will change my life forever. $8,500,000. That's what my AgTech startup just sold for. The pen feels heavy in my hand, and I should be celebrating, but all I can think about is the Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago when my mother looked me in the eye and called me the family disappointment. My father nodded in agreement while my sister smirked into her wine glass. They told 15 relatives I was wasting my life playing with dirt and computers. But 3 years ago I was sleeping in my car, eating ramen for dinner, and my own mother refused to take my calls. Let me take you back to where it all started. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, hit that like button because you're going to want to hear how this ends. Don't forget to subscribe because trust me, this journey gets wild. Now, let me tell you about the family that thought it'd never amount to anything. I grew up in a wealthy suburb of Connecticut where success meant one thing: an advanced degree from an Ivy League school and a 6-figure salary before you turned 30. My father, Dr. Raymond Mitchell, was a renowned cardiac surgeon who pulled in $500,000 a year. My mother, Patricia Mitchell, was a corporate attorney at one of those big law firms where partners ate associates for breakfast. Our house had 6 bedrooms, a pool, and a 3-car garage filled with luxury vehicles. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. From the inside, I was drowning in expectations I never asked for. My older sister, Vanessa, was the golden child who could do no wrong. She graduated summa cum laude from Yale, sailed through Harvard Medical School, and landed a prestigious position as an internal medicine specialist at Johns Hopkins by the time she was 29. My brother, Marcus, followed a similarly impressive path, earning his computer science degree from MIT before joining Google as a software engineer. Then there was me, the daughter who wanted to study dirt. That's how my father described my passion for agriculture when I told him I wanted to major in agricultural science at Cornell. He said I might as well major in unemployment. The comparisons started young and never stopped. At family dinners, my parents would spend 30 minutes discussing Vanessa's latest research paper or Marcus' newest project at Google. When they finally turned to me, it was always with this look of disappointment, like they couldn't believe I came from the same gene pool. I remember one dinner when I was 17, so excited to tell them about a school project where I'd helped design a rainwater collection system for a local community garden. My father cut me off after 2 sentences to ask Vanessa about her acceptance to Yale. My mother patted my hand and said, "That's nice, dear," before changing the subject entirely. I felt invisible in my own home, like my dreams didn't matter, because they didn't fit the family mold. When I received a full scholarship to Cornell University to study agricultural science, I thought maybe they'd finally see my potential. Instead, they called it a waste of my intelligence. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table and spent 2 hours trying to convince me to go to law school instead. She had my entire career mapped out: undergrad at an Ivy, law school at Harvard or Yale, then a partnership track at her firm. When I refused, my father joined the conversation. He told me agriculture was a dying field, that I was throwing away opportunities most people would kill for. He said I was being selfish and immature, that I clearly didn't understand how the real world worked. The fight that followed was the worst we'd ever had. I was 18 years old, standing in our pristine living room with its white furniture and expensive art, and my parents were treating me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. Vanessa walked in halfway through and actually laughed at me. She said, "Good luck playing in the dirt while the rest of us build real careers. Don't come crying to us when you realize how stupid this decision was." My mother nodded along like Vanessa had just said something profound. My father's face was red with anger. He told me that if I insisted on making this mistake, I was on my own financially. No help with living expenses, no safety net, nothing. They'd pay for tuition at an Ivy League school for pre-med or pre-law, but they wouldn't give me a dime for Cornell agriculture. I looked at all 3 of them and realized they didn't see me at all. They saw a disappointment, a failure, a black sheep who refused to follow the script they'd written for my life. I chose Cornell anyway. I packed my bags that summer with my mother barely speaking to me and my father, giving me lectures about responsibility every chance he got. Vanessa made snide comments about how I'd be back within a year, begging them to help me transfer to a real program. My brother stayed neutral, but he didn't defend me either. The day I left for college, my mother hugged me stiffly and said, "I hope you know what you're doing." My father handed me a check for first semester's tuition and said it was the last financial help I'd get from them. He made me sign a paper acknowledging that I was making this choice against their advice and that they bore no responsibility for the consequences. I was 18 years old, and my own parents were making me sign a waiver like I was about to do something dangerous. That's when I understood that their love came with conditions, and I'd just broken the biggest one. Cornell was harder than I expected, but not because of the academics. I was working 3 part-time jobs just to survive. My scholarship covered tuition and fees, but I still needed money for housing, food, books, and basic necessities. I spent mornings serving coffee at a campus cafe, afternoons as a research assistant in the agricultural engineering lab, and weekends doing maintenance work at the university greenhouses. My friends from wealthy families would post pictures of their spring break trips to Europe or the Caribbean while I was picking up extra shifts to make rent. I learned to skip meals when money got tight, eating ramen noodles or peanut butter sandwiches for days at a time. I wore the same rotation of 5 outfits for 2 years because I couldn't afford new clothes. While other students complained about their meal plans or their dorm rooms, I was grateful just to have a roof over my head. The loneliness was worse than the financial struggle. I'd call home once a week out of obligation, and my mother would ask how I was doing in a tone that suggested she was waiting for me to admit I'd made a mistake. My father never asked about my classes or my research. Instead, he'd update me on Vanessa's achievements or Marcus' promotions like he was rubbing salt in a wound. Vanessa never called me at all. When we did talk at family gatherings, she'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I must be enjoying my simple little life away from real ambition. I stopped going home for holidays after my freshman year because it hurt too much to be in that house where I didn't belong. But something magical happened in my junior year that changed everything. I was working on a research project that partnered students with local farmers to study sustainable agriculture practices. That's when I met Walter, a 52-year-old farmer who'd just lost his family farm after 3 generations. He sat across from me in a tiny office at the Agricultural Extension Center and told me his story with tears in his eyes. He'd taken out loans to buy new equipment, but an unexpected pest infestation destroyed half his crops. Without crop insurance he could afford, and without the knowledge to predict the infestation, he couldn't repay the loans. The bank foreclosed. His grandfather's farm, the land his father had worked, everything was gone because he couldn't predict a threat he didn't know was coming. I went back to my dorm room that night and couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Walter and about all the small farmers facing the same problems. They didn't have access to the technology that big agricultural corporations used. They couldn't afford fancy weather prediction systems or pest management consultants. They were making decisions based on intuition and experience, but climate change was making old patterns obsolete. What if there was a way to give small farmers access to the same predictive technology that big operations used? What if we could use sensors and artificial intelligence to help them make better decisions about irrigation, pest control, and harvesting? I spent the next 6 months obsessed with this idea. I took extra classes in computer science and data analysis. I spent hundreds of hours in the library researching precision agriculture, machine learning, and IoT sensor technology. I connected with a professor in the engineering department who specialized in agricultural robotics. Together, we started developing a prototype system, cheap sensors that could monitor soil moisture, temperature, and pest activity, connected to an AI model that could predict problems before they became disasters. It was rough and basic, but it worked in our test plots. I could see the potential to help farmers like Walter avoid catastrophe. That's when I made the mistake of calling home to share my excitement. I actually thought my parents might be proud that I was doing something innovative, something that combined technology and agriculture in a meaningful way. I called on a Sunday afternoon, and my mother answered. I barely got 3 sentences into my explanation before she interrupted me. She said, "So you want to be a tech farmer now?" That's even more pathetic than I thought. I heard my father in the background asking what I wanted. When my mother told him, he got on the phone and said I needed to stop wasting time on ridiculous ideas and focus on getting a real job after graduation. He suggested I could still apply to medical school if I took some prerequisite courses over the summer. But the real betrayal came from Vanessa. A week after that phone call, I started getting messages from relatives asking if I was okay. Apparently, Vanessa had been calling everyone in the family, telling them I was having delusions about starting a tech company and that she was worried about my mental health. She told our aunt I was being unrealistic and needed an intervention. She told our cousin I was wasting Cornell's resources on a fantasy project. She made it sound like I was having a breakdown instead of pursuing an innovative idea. When I confronted her, she said she was trying to protect me from embarrassment. She said someone needed to give me a reality check before I made an even bigger fool of myself. I realized then that my sister wasn't just unsupportive. She was actively working to undermine me. She wanted me to fail because my success would threaten her position as the perfect daughter. I stopped talking to my family after that. I poured everything into developing my prototype and finishing my degree. If they wanted to count me out, fine. It'd prove them wrong without their help or their approval. I didn't need their permission to chase my dream. But deep down, in the quiet moments late at night, I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe I was wasting my time. Those doubts followed me through graduation and into the scariest decision of my life. I graduated from Cornell with honors and immediately received job offers from 3 major agricultural companies. The positions came with excellent salaries, benefits, and the kind of stability my parents had always wanted for me. I turned them all down. Instead, I took the $9,000 I'd saved from working multiple jobs through college and used it to rent a tiny garage space in upstate New York. That garage became my first office, my laboratory, and eventually my bedroom. I furnished it with a used desk from Craigslist, a folding chair, and an air mattress I bought at Walmart. The space had no heat, unreliable electricity, and a bathroom I had to share with the auto repair shop next door, but it was mine. Those first months were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was living on $2 a day for food, which meant a lot of instant noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free samples I could find at the grocery store. I showered at a budget gym that cost $10 a month. I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation, washing them in the garage sink. When winter came, I slept in every piece of clothing I owned because I couldn't afford to run a space heater all night. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, my breath visible in the cold air, and spend 18 hours working on sensors, writing code, and teaching myself everything I didn't know about starting a business. But I wasn't completely alone. 3 months into my garage adventure, I met Claudia at a startup networking event I'd snuck into by volunteering to help set up chairs. She was 30 years old, a brilliant software engineer who'd spent 5 years at Microsoft before leaving to pursue her own ventures. We started talking during the coffee break, and I told her about my vision for helping small farmers. Her eyes lit up because she'd grown up on a farm in Iowa. She understood exactly what problem I was trying to solve because she'd watched her own parents struggle with the same issues. When I showed her my prototype, she spent 2 hours asking technical questions and making suggestions. By the end of the night, she asked if I'd be interested in a co-founder. She said she'd work for free in exchange for equity because she believed in the mission. I almost cried right there in the parking lot. Claudia and I worked like possessed people. She'd come to the garage after her consulting gigs and we'd code until 2 or 3 in the morning. We built a functioning system of wireless sensors that could monitor multiple environmental factors, connected to machine learning algorithms that could predict irrigation needs and pest outbreaks with 70% accuracy. It wasn't perfect, but it was promising. We called our company AgriSense, and we were convinced we were building something that could change lives. We were also completely broke and running out of runway fast. Then came Thanksgiving, and I made the mistake of thinking enough time had passed that maybe my family would be curious about what I was doing. I drove 6 hours to Connecticut in my beat-up Honda, wearing my nicest outfit, which was a dress I'd bought at a thrift store for $8. I walked into my parents' house hoping for curiosity, maybe even interest. What I got was a public execution. The house was full of relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. The dining room table was set with my mother's expensive china and crystal. Everything looked perfect and elegant, and I felt like a fraud in my cheap dress and worn shoes. Dinner started normally enough with my father carving the turkey and my mother directing the flow of dishes around the table. Then my aunt asked me what I was up to these days, and the room went quiet. Before I could answer, my father set down his carving knife and said, "This is our disappointment, daughter. She chose to throw away her education to play with dirt and computers." He said it loudly enough that everyone heard. He said it like he was introducing a particularly shameful family secret. My mother nodded and added, "We tell people she's still figuring things out because we're too ashamed to admit what she's really doing." I felt my face burn with humiliation as 15 people stared at me like I was a curiosity, something to be pitied or mocked. Vanessa, sitting across from me in her designer dress with her Johns Hopkins ID badge still clipped to her purse, smiled sweetly and said, "I'm surprised you even showed up. Don't you have some sensors to plant in the mud?" The table erupted in awkward laughter. My cousin asked if I was actually living in a garage. My uncle made a joke about me becoming a bag lady. My grandmother, who Eid always thought was kind, patted my hand and whispered, "It's never too late to go back to school for something practical, dear." Every comment felt like a knife. These were people who were supposed to love me, and they were treating me like a punchline. Then my Aunt Lorraine, who had always considered one of the nice ones, pulled me aside into the kitchen during dessert. She put her arm around me and said, "Don't listen to them, honey. I think what you're doing is brave." I almost hugged her. Finally, someone who understood. But as I was leaving that night, I overheard her talking to my mother in the hallway. She said, "You're right to be worried, Patricia. She's wasting her life. Someone should stage an intervention before she ends up homeless." I stood frozen on the other side of the wall, realizing that even her kindness had been fake. She'd been reporting back to my mother, playing the concerned aunt, while actually agreeing with everyone who thought I was a failure. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove back to my garage. I sat in the parking lot for an hour, crying so hard I thought I might throw up. I'd known my family didn't support me, but I hadn't realized they actively despised what I was doing. I hadn't understood that they saw me as an embarrassment, something to be ashamed of and hidden. That night, I made myself a promise. I would succeed not because I needed their approval, but because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't a disappointment. I needed to know that following my passion wasn't a mistake. I needed to believe that my dreams mattered, even if my family thought they were worthless. 8 months after Thanksgiving, I hit rock bottom. The $9,000 was gone. It burned through every penny trying to keep AgriSense alive, and I had nothing left. I couldn't afford the garage anymore, and the landlord gave me 3 days to clear out. I loaded everything I owned into my Honda, including the air mattress, my laptop, our sensors, and the boxes of components Claudia and I had been using for testing. That car became my home. It'd park in different spots each night, sometimes in a Walmart parking lot, sometimes behind a fast food restaurant, anywhere I thought I wouldn't get harassed or towed. I kept a gym membership so I could shower and use a bathroom. I brushed my teeth in gas station restrooms. I lived off dollar menu items and whatever food samples I could get at grocery stores. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the shame. I was a Cornell graduate living in my car. I was 25 years old, and I couldn't afford a place to sleep. I'd wake up with my neck stiff from sleeping in the driver's seat, and I'd look at myself in the rearview mirror and wonder what the hell I was doing. Claudia was starting to have doubts too. Her family was pressuring her to get a real job, telling her she was wasting her talent on a pipe dream. She'd show up to our work sessions and I could see the worry in her eyes. We were running out of time, out of money, and out of hope. That's when I broke down and called my mother. I sat in my car outside a McDonald's, staring at my phone for 20 minutes before I finally dialed. When she answered, I tried to keep my voice steady. I told her I was in trouble and I needed help. Just a small loan, maybe $2,000 to get me through the next month while I figured things out. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my mother said, in that cold, clipped voice she used when she was disappointed in one of her law associates, "I told you this would happen. You chose this path, Harper. Now you have to live with the consequences. Don't call us again until you're ready to admit you were wrong." I tried to explain that I wasn't giving up, that I just needed a temporary bridge. She cut me off. She said Vanessa had just been promoted to head of her department at Johns Hopkins, and why couldn't I be more like my sister, someone who made smart choices and didn't embarrass the family. She said Id had every advantage in life and Id squandered all of it. Then she hung up. She didn't ask where I was living. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just hung up. I sat in that parking lot and cried harder than Id cried in my entire life. I was homeless, broke, and my own mother had told me I deserved it. I was ready to give up. I was ready to find some corporate job, move into a cheap apartment, and forget AgriSense had ever existed. Id failed, and everyone had been right about me. But the next morning, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting at a Starbucks nursing the smallest coffee on the menu because it was the only thing I could afford, and they let you sit for hours. An older man, probably mid-60s, sat down at the table next to me and started chatting. His name was Walter Richmond, and yes, he had the same first name as the farmer who'd originally inspired my idea. He was a retired farmer who'd sold his land and now spent his time investing in agricultural startups. He asked what I was working on, probably just making conversation. I almost brushed him off, but something about his kind eyes made me open up. I told him everything. The sensors, the AI predictions, the vision for helping small farmers, the prototype that actually worked. I even told him I was living in my car. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he pulled out a business card. He said he wanted to see a demo. Could I meet him at his office tomorrow? I showed up the next day with my laptop, a sensor kit, and printouts of our test results. I gave him the pitch of my life, showing him data from the 10 farms we'd been working with, proving that our system could predict irrigation needs with 80% accuracy and pest outbreaks with 75% accuracy. Walter asked me questions for 2 hours. He asked about scalability, about costs, about competition. He asked about my background and my co-founder. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "I'll give you $50,000 for 10% of the company, but you need to show me real progress in 6 months. If you can't, I walk away and you keep the money. If you can, we talk about Series A." I almost fell out of my chair. $50,000 was more money than I'd ever had in my life. It was enough to get an apartment, buy better equipment, and actually pay ourselves a small salary. It was enough to prove this thing could work. I signed the papers that afternoon, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt like maybe I wasn't crazy after all. The $50,000 bought us 6 months of survival and a real shot at proving our concept. Claudia and I rented a small office space, nothing fancy, just 800 square feet with fluorescent lights and a bathroom that barely worked. But it was heaven compared to living in my car. We hired one part-time intern from Cornell and launched a pilot program with 10 small farms across upstate New York. These weren't big operations, just family farms between 20 and 100 acres, the kind of places that were barely hanging on financially. We installed our sensors, calibrated our AI models, and spent 3 months gathering data and refining our predictions. The results were better than we'd hoped. 5 of the 10 farms saw their crop yields increase by 25% because our system helped them optimize irrigation and fertilizer application. 3 farms saved 30% on water costs by using our precise irrigation recommendations. 2 farms avoided devastating pest outbreaks because our sensors detected the early warning signs and our AI flagged the threat 5 days before the farmers would have noticed anything wrong. The farmers loved us. They started telling their friends and neighbors. We had a waiting list of 40 more farms wanting to try our system. Local news stations started calling, wanting to do stories about these young women helping save family farms with technology. I was so excited. I sent an email to my family. I attached photos of our office, screenshots of our data, and a link to a news article about AgriSense. I wrote about how we were finally proving the concept, how we might actually help farmers avoid the kind of losses that Walter, the original farmer I'd met, had suffered. I wanted them to see that I hadn't been delusional, that my dream had merit. My father didn't respond. My mother sent back a one-line email that said, "That's nice, dear." Marcus sent a thumbs-up emoji. Vanessa didn't respond at all, which I should have taken as a warning sign. A week later, Walter called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, which was strange because he was normally so relaxed and supportive. He told me Head received a concerning phone call from someone claiming to be my sister, a doctor at Johns Hopkins. This person had told him that I had a history of mental instability, that I'd dropped out of several programs before Cornell, and that my family was worried I was going to waste his money on a venture that was doomed to fail. Shed even sent him documents that looked like medical records, suggesting I'd been treated for delusional disorder. He showed me the email. It had come from Vanessa's hospital email address. The medical records were completely fabricated, but they had official-looking letterhead and signatures. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My own sister had tried to sabotage my business by lying to my investor. Shed used her credentials as a doctor to give her lies credibility. Shed forged medical documents, which was probably illegal. Walter said Head almost pulled his funding before he decided to call me instead. He wanted to hear my side. I showed him everything. My Cornell transcripts, my graduation records, my complete academic history. I offered to sign a release so he could verify everything. He believed me, but the damage was done. He was now worried that my family might cause more problems. He asked me point blank if they would continue to interfere with the business. I told him honestly that I didn't know, but I'd handle it. I called Vanessa that night, my hands shaking with rage. She answered on the third ring, sounding cheerful until she realized it was me. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her I knew what Shed done, that Shed committed fraud by forging medical records, and that she could lose her medical license if I reported her. Do you know what she said? She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "You're an embarrassment to this family, Harper. Someone needs to stop you before you humiliate us further." If that investor had any sense, he'd pull his money and run. I asked her why she hated me so much. She said, "I don't hate you. I just can't stand watching you pretend you're special when you're not. You're ordinary, and you need to accept that." I hung up and immediately called my parents, thinking surely they'd be horrified by what Vanessa had done. My father answered, and I told him everything. He listened in silence, and then he said, "Vanessa is just looking out for you. Maybe you should listen to her advice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him Shed committed fraud. He said I was overreacting and that Vanessa was just concerned about my well-being. My mother got on the phone and said, "Maybe this is a sign that you should give up on this business idea. You've proven you can try, and now you can move on to something more suitable." I told them both that Vanessa's actions were illegal and immoral. My mother said, "We won't support this madness anymore, Harper. Don't contact us again unless you have something constructive to say." That night, I checked my phone and realized both my parents and Vanessa had blocked my number. I sent an email to Marcus, hoping my brother might at least be neutral. He replied saying our parents had asked him not to communicate with me until I got my priorities straight. Just like that, my entire family had cut me off. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I'd refused to fail on command. They wanted me to give up so they could say they'd been right all along. My success threatened their narrative about me being the disappointment daughter, so they were actively trying to destroy what I was building. It was twisted and cruel, and it hurt in ways I didn't think possible. But it also clarified something important. I didn't need their approval or their love. I needed to succeed for myself, and I needed to do it without them. 2 weeks after my family cut me off, everything changed in a way I never expected. The local news story about AgriSense went viral. A TikToker who specialized in agricultural content found the news segment and made a video about how 2 women were revolutionizing farming with affordable technology. The video hit 3 million views in 48 hours. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about AgriSense. My email inbox exploded with messages from farmers across the country wanting to try our system. Our website, which had been getting maybe 20 visits a day, crashed from the traffic. We were getting 500 inquiries a day from farmers, agriculture organizations, and even some venture capital firms. Claudia and I were completely unprepared for the attention. We'd been operating in survival mode for so long that we didn't have systems in place to handle this kind of growth. We spent 3 days just responding to emails and trying to triage which opportunities to pursue. Then the VC meetings started. 5 different venture capital firms reached out wanting to hear our pitch. These weren't small, local investors. These were major Silicon Valley firms with billions of dollars under management. They flew us out to California, put us up in nice hotels, and treated us like we were already successful. It was surreal and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. After 2 weeks of intense meetings and negotiations, we had 2 term sheets on the table. One firm offered $1.5 million at a $6 million valuation. Another offered $1.2 million at a $5 million valuation. The first offer was bigger, but the second firm had deep experience in AgTech and relationships with companies like John Deere and Monsanto. Claudia and I debated for days before choosing the second firm. We signed the deal on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 1 year after that horrible Thanksgiving dinner. We had $1.2 million in the bank, a real office with 12 employees, and a product that was actually changing farmers' lives. I should have been purely happy, but I knew what was coming. Sure enough, 3 days after the funding announcement hit TechCrunch, I started getting messages from investors we'd pitched to but who'd turned us down. They were forwarding me warnings they'd received from someone claiming to have inside information about AgriSense. The messages all said basically the same thing. The technology was stolen from Cornell research projects, I didn't have the legal rights to the IP, and anyone who invested would end up in a lawsuit. The messages came from different email addresses, but the language was similar enough that I knew they were from the same source. When I traced one of the IP addresses, it led back to Johns Hopkins Hospital network. Vanessa was still trying to sabotage me, and now she was going after our investors. This wasn't just petty anymore. This was potentially business-ending. If enough people believed we'd stolen intellectual property, our investors could pull out, our customers could abandon us, and our reputation could be destroyed before we even got started. I had to hire a law firm, which cost us $50,000 we didn't want to spend, to prove definitively that all our technology was either original or based on open-source foundations. We had to get statements from Cornell confirming that my research as a student belonged to me. We had to provide documentation showing every component of our system and its provenance. The process took 2 months and was one of the most stressful periods of my life. But the vindication, when it came, was sweet. Cornell sent an official letter stating unequivocally that I owned all intellectual property related to AgriSense and that the university had no claim to any of our technology. Our lawyers compiled a 50-page document proving the originality of our work. We sent it to every investor. WAOED received the warning messages. Most of them apologized for doubting us. One VC even said he wished he'd invested now that he saw how we handled adversity. The smear campaign backfired, and, if anything, it made us look more credible because we'd been able to thoroughly debunk the accusations. I should have been satisfied with that outcome, but I was angry. Vanessa had tried twice now to destroy my company, and she'd gotten away with it both times. My parents knew what she was doing and supported her. They'd all blocked me, cut me out of their lives, but they wouldn't leave me alone. They wanted me to fail so badly that they were willing to commit fraud and defamation to make it happen. I thought about confronting them publicly or pursuing legal action against Vanessa, but our lawyers advised against it. They said family disputes made companies look unstable. Better to just succeed loudly enough that the truth became undeniable. So, that's what I focused on. Every time I wanted to call my family and tell them off, I poured that energy into growing AgriSense. Every time I felt hurt by their rejection, I channeled it into helping more farmers. My revenge would be building something so successful they couldn't deny it. We spent 8 months scaling like crazy. We went from 12 employees to 60. We expanded from New York to 10 states. We had 300 farms using our system, and our revenue hit $300,000 a month. Everything looked perfect on paper, but underneath, cracks were forming. We'd grown too fast and hadn't put proper security and vetting systems in place. That's how Bradley Sutton slipped through. He applied for a senior engineering position, and his resume was impressive. 5 years at IBM, 2 years at a smaller AgTech startup, strong recommendations. We hired him in January and put him to work on our core prediction algorithms. Bradley seemed great at first. He was smart, hardworking, and integrated well with the team. But 3 months after he started, strange things began happening. A competitor launched a product that was suspiciously similar to ours, using almost identical sensors and similar AI architecture. Then, another competitor announced features we'd been developing in secret. Someone was leaking our proprietary information, but we couldn't figure out who. Our investors were getting nervous. If competitors could replicate our technology this quickly, where was our competitive advantage? We started losing customers to these new, cheaper alternatives. Our revenue dropped from $300,000 a month to $180,000 in just 6 weeks. Claudia spent days digging through our system logs, looking for any sign of unusual activity. She found it buried in access logs that nobody usually checked. Someone had been copying our source code repository to an external drive, usually late at night when the office was empty. The access logs pointed to Bradley's login credentials. We confronted him with the evidence, and he crumbled immediately. He confessed that he'd been approached by someone claiming to be conducting due diligence on AgriSense on behalf of a potential investor. This person had offered him $20,000 for access to our code and product roadmap. He'd justified it by telling himself he was just helping an investor make an informed decision. He had no idea he was stealing trade secrets and selling them to competitors. We fired Bradley immediately and filed a lawsuit against him and the company that had bought our stolen information. But the damage was done. Our technology was in the hands of competitors who were using it to undercut our pricing. Our investors were furious. We had an emergency board meeting where they basically put us on probation. They wanted to see a plan for how we'd differentiate ourselves and win back market share, or they'd push for new leadership. For the first time since securing funding, I faced the real possibility of losing control of the company ED built from nothing. That's when I got the call from my Aunt Lorraine, the one who'd pretended to be supportive at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. I hadn't spoken to her since Ed overheard her real opinion of me, so I was surprised when she called. She said she'd heard about AgriSense's troubles through the grapevine and wanted to offer emotional support. I was in such a dark place that I actually believed her. I told her everything: the stolen code, the lawsuit, the pressure from investors, the fear that I might lose the company. She made sympathetic noises and told me how brave I was for keeping going despite all the obstacles. 2 days later, Vanessa called me from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, she said, "I heard about your little spy problem." Aunt Lorraine filled me in. "I just want you to know that I'm not surprised. This is what happens when you try to play in a world you don't understand. You're in over your head, and everyone can see it." That's when I realized the truth. I asked Vanessa directly if Aunt Lorraine had been feeding her information, and Vanessa laughed. She said, "Of course she has. She's been keeping me updated on everything since you started this ridiculous venture." "How do you think I knew exactly when to contact your investor last year? Aunt Lorraine told me you were about to close the deal." "You're so naive, Harper. You actually thought someone in this family would support you." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Lorraine had been playing concerned aunt while reporting everything I said back to Vanessa. Every time Id thought I had one ally in the family, she'd been working against me. I hung up on Vanessa and immediately called Lorraine. I asked her point blank if she'd been spying on me for my sister. She didn't even try to deny it. She said, "Your sister is protecting the family reputation. Someone has to keep an eye on you and make sure you don't drag us all down with you when you fail. And you will fail, Harper. This spy situation proves you're not capable of running a real company." I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. But the worst came in an email from my mother 2 days later. She'd seen news coverage of our legal troubles, and instead of offering support, she sent a message that said, "I told you this would happen. You should have listened to us from the beginning. This is what happens when arrogance meets reality. Your father and I won't be associated with this embarrassment." My father sent a separate message. "This is what happens when you're too stubborn to take good advice. You've wasted years of your life and other people's money. It's time to admit defeat and move on." And then Vanessa, not content with her phone call, posted on Facebook, "Some people need to fail publicly to learn humility." Watching my sister learn this lesson is painful but necessary. I hope she'll finally make better choices after this wake-up call. The post was shared 50 times within our extended family network. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all watching my public failure and nodding along with Vanessa's assessment. I sat alone in my office at 10 o'clock at night, looking at the empty desks and dark computer screens. We'd built something real. Helped hundreds of farmers, created jobs, and pushed agricultural technology forward. But one bad hire had brought us to the edge of collapse, and my family was gleefully watching me drown. I thought about giving up. I thought about selling the company for whatever I could get and walking away. I even drafted a resignation letter to my board. But then I thought about Walter, the original farmer who'd lost everything. I thought about the 300 families using our system to protect their livelihoods. I thought about every person who'd told me it'd fail, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I was going to fight back harder than I'd ever fought before. Claudia and I spent 3 days locked in a conference room with our lawyers and our lead engineers, figuring out how to turn this disaster into an opportunity. We realized that while our code had been stolen, our real competitive advantage wasn't the code itself. It was the data we'd collected from 300 farms over 18 months. We had millions of data points about real-world agricultural conditions, crop performance, pest behavior, and weather patterns. That data was what made our AI predictions so accurate. No competitor could replicate that, even if they had our algorithms. So we decided to double down on data and build features that only worked with our proprietary dataset. We also filed lawsuits against Bradley, the company's head, sold information to, and the person who'd approached him in the first place. Our lawyers worked fast, and within 6 weeks, we had a settlement. The competing companies had to stop using our stolen code, destroy any derivative works, and pay us $800,000 in damages and legal fees. Bradley was charged with theft of trade secrets. The court case became news, and suddenly we were portrayed as the scrappy startup that fought back against corporate espionage. It was actually good publicity. Farmers saw us as fighters who wouldn't give up, which was exactly the kind of company they wanted to work with. With the settlement money and renewed confidence from our investors, we went into overdrive on product development. We launched version 2.0 of AgriSense with features our competitors couldn't match. Drone integration for crop monitoring, predictive analytics that worked 3 weeks out instead of just 1 week, and a mobile app that gave farmers real-time alerts on their phones. We also partnered with John Deere, the biggest name in agricultural equipment, to integrate our sensors with their machinery. That partnership was a game changer. Suddenly, we weren't just a small startup. We were a John Deere partner, which gave us instant credibility with farmers across the country. The results were dramatic. Within 3 months of launching version 2, our customer base tripled from 300 farms to 900 farms. Revenue went from $180,000 a month to $500,000 a month. We hired aggressively, bringing on engineers, salespeople, and customer support staff. We moved into a bigger office space. We were featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. I was invited to speak at AgTech conferences where I'd once been an unknown face in the audience. Everything I'd dreamed about when I was sleeping in my car was coming true, and it felt surreal. Then, in September, 2 years and 10 months after that awful Thanksgiving dinner, I got a call from the VP of Corporate Development at AgTech Solutions, a major agricultural technology company with a market cap of $300 million. They wanted to acquire AgriSense. They flew Claudia and me out to their headquarters in Iowa and spent a full day touring their facilities and explaining their vision. They saw us as a key piece of their strategy to help small and medium-sized farms compete with industrial agriculture. After 2 weeks of negotiations that involved lawyers, accountants, and advisors on both sides, they put a final offer on the table: $8,500,000 in cash, plus equity in the parent company, plus 3-year employment contracts for Claudia and me as VP of Innovation and VP of Technology, respectively. We'd retain our team, keep our brand, and have the resources of a much larger company behind us. Claudia and I debated for exactly 3 hours before we said yes. We'd built something from nothing, proven our concept, changed farmers' lives, and now we were getting a life-changing exit. We signed the papers on a Tuesday morning in a conference room in Manhattan, the same city where my family lived, the same city that represented everything they valued about success. As I signed my name on the final page, I thought about sitting in my Honda Civic, eating dollar menu burgers and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I thought about my mother hanging up on me when I asked for $2,000. I thought about Vanessa forging medical records to sabotage my investor. I thought about my father calling me a disappointment in front of 15 relatives. And I thought about how none of their cruelty had stopped me. If anything, it had fueled me. I'd built this company to prove I wasn't a failure, and now I had $8,500,000 and a successful exit that said I'd been right all along. The acquisition news hit the tech press within 24 hours. TechCrunch ran the headline, "AgriSense acquired for $8.5 million, proving AgTech's growing appeal." Forbes published a profile calling me one of the most promising young entrepreneurs in agricultural technology. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature about how precision agriculture was finally becoming accessible to small farmers. My phone exploded with congratulatory messages from investors, colleagues, and farmers who'd used our system. But the messages I found most interesting came from my family. My mother called from a number I didn't have saved, leaving a voicemail that said, "Harper, darling, we saw the wonderful news about your company. We're so proud of you. We always knew you had it in you. Call us back when you can." My father sent an email, "Congratulations on your success. I'm proud to call you my daughter. Perhaps we can get together for dinner soon and celebrate properly." Marcus texted, "Hey, congrats on the exit. That's amazing. Let's catch up soon." Even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly reaching out, asking how I was doing and suggesting we should reconnect. And Vanessa, my sister who'd spent years trying to destroy me, sent a long email apologizing for being too hard on me and saying she'd always believed in my potential. She suggested we should let bygones be bygones and start fresh as sisters who'd both achieved success in their fields. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. These were the same people who'd called me a disappointment, who'd refused to help when I was homeless, who'd actively sabotaged my business, who'd publicly mocked my failures. Now that I had money and media attention, suddenly I was worthy of their love and respect. I didn't respond to any of them for a week. I needed time to process the anger I felt at their sudden change of heart and the temptation to just accept their apologies because having a family felt better than being alone. But I knew I couldn't move forward without addressing what had happened. So I arranged a dinner at a nice restaurant in Manhattan. I invited my parents, Vanessa, Marcus, and Aunt Lorraine. I made a reservation at a place with white tablecloths and a wine list that cost more than I used to spend on food in a month. They all showed up dressed nicely, smiling, ready to celebrate. My mother hugged me like we'd never had a fight. My father shook my hand and said he wanted to hear all about the acquisition. Vanessa complimented my dress. Lorraine asked about my apartment. It was like stepping into an alternate universe where none of the past 3 years had happened. We sat down, ordered expensive wine that my father insisted on paying for, and made small talk through appetizers. Then, as the main courses arrived, I set down my fork and said what I'd come to say. I told them that for years, they'd called me a disappointment. That they'd refused to help me when I was sleeping in my car and eating ramen for every meal. That they'd actively sabotaged my business, spread lies to my investors, and forged documents to try to make me fail. I looked at Vanessa and listed every time she'd tried to undermine me. I looked at Lorraine and told her I knew she'd been reporting everything I said back to my sister. I looked at my parents and reminded them that they'd told me not to contact them again unless I admitted I was wrong. I spoke calmly, without raising my voice, stating facts they couldn't deny. My mother started to interrupt, saying I was misremembering things. I pulled out my phone and showed them screenshots. Emails from my mother telling me I was wasting my life. Messages from my father calling my business idea madness. The Facebook post where Vanessa said I needed to learn humility through public failure. Forwarded emails from investors showing the lies Vanessa had told. Text messages from Lorraine admitting she'd been spying on me. They sat in silence as I laid out a documented case of 3 years of cruelty and betrayal. Then I told them the truth they needed to hear. You only care now because I have money. You only respect me now because other people say I'm successful. You don't love me. You love the idea of being associated with my success. And that's not real family. Vanessa tried to defend herself, saying she'd been trying to protect me from making mistakes. I asked her if forging medical records was protection. She went quiet. My father said they'd always wanted the best for me. I asked him if calling me a disappointment in front of 15 relatives was wanting the best for me. He had no answer. My mother said I was being too harsh, that families have disagreements but they move past them. I told her that what happened between us wasn't a disagreement. It was systematic rejection and sabotage that lasted years. I told them all that I forgave them because carrying anger was exhausting, but I didn't need them in my life anymore. I'd built my success without them, and I'd continue to live my life without them. I stood up, left money on the table to cover my portion of the meal, and walked out. I left them sitting there in that expensive restaurant, probably for the first time in their lives without anything to say. I expected to feel triumphant or vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad that my family had loved their image of who I should be more than they loved the person I actually was. Sad that their affection came with so many conditions that I could never meet. Sad that I'd wasted so much energy hoping they'd change. But in the months that followed, something shifted. I stopped checking to see if my parents would call. I stopped wondering if Vanessa would genuinely apologize. I stopped carrying the weight of their disapproval. I focused on my work at AgriTech Solutions, on the farmers we were helping, on the team I was building. I stayed close with Claudia, who'd been there through everything and who understood what we'd overcome together. I maintained my friendship with Walter, the angel investor who'd believed in me when I had nothing. I built a life with people who loved me for who I was, not for what I'd achieved or what family I came from. My brother Marcus reached out 6 months after the dinner and apologized sincerely. He said he'd been a coward for not standing up for me, and he wanted to do better. We started rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully. He was the only member of my family I stayed in contact with, and even that relationship had boundaries. The others sent occasional messages on birthdays or holidays, surface-level attempts at connection that I politely acknowledged but didn't encourage. They'd lost their chance to be part of my life when it mattered, and I wasn't interested in giving them access now that my life was good. I used some of my money to start a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in agriculture, specifically students from families who don't support their choices. I called it the Disappointment Fund, turning the label my parents gave me into something that helps others chase their dreams despite opposition. Every year, we give 5 full scholarships to students who are funding their own education because their families withdrew support. I tell them my story, and I tell them that family opposition doesn't define their worth. I tell them that the people who doubt them most are often the ones closest to them, and that's okay. They don't need permission or approval to chase their dreams. I learned that success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about knowing your worth even when no one else sees it. It's about building a life you're proud of, even if that life doesn't match anyone else's expectations. My parents still introduce me to people as our daughter who sold her company. They'll never say they were wrong about me. They'll never acknowledge the pain they caused or the years they wasted trying to break my spirit. And you know what? I don't need them to. Because I know my worth. I know what I built from nothing. I know the farmers whose livelihoods improved because of AgriSense. I know the team members who found meaningful work at my company. I know the students who got scholarships because I turned my pain into purpose. That knowledge is enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's building a life so full of purpose and joy that their opinions no longer matter. It's surrounding yourself with people who celebrate you instead of diminish you. It's knowing that you had the courage to bet on yourself when no one else would. My parents called me their disappointment daughter, and maybe in their eyes, I still am, because I didn't follow their script. But I'm not a disappointment to myself, and that's the only opinion that truly counts. I'm Harper. I'm 31 years old, and I built an $8 million company from a garage while my family tried to tear me down. And that's a story I'll be proud of for the rest of my life. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between following your dreams and keeping your family's approval? Drop a comment below and tell me your story because I want to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button. If you want to hear more stories about people who succeeded despite the odds, subscribe to this channel because I share these stories every week. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family rejection isn't the end of the road, it's sometimes just the beginning of finding your real strength. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you're not defined by who doubts you. You're defined by what you build when everyone says you can't. Keep chasing your dreams, keep proving yourself right, and never let anyone make you feel like a disappointment for being exactly who you're meant to be. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that your worth isn't up for debate.